Hello, welcome to FortiGuard Live. I'm Manky, Vice President of Global Threat Intelligence with FortiGuard Labs, and today joining me once again is Doug Santos, our Director of Advanced Threat Intelligence. How you doing, Doug?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm always good talking to you, Doug. It's great to catch up again, and
Yes.
we live, eat, and breathe threat intelligence within FortiGuard Labs. So we're talking every day about this stuff. But it's great to get up on stage here with FortiGuard Live and dissect some of the things that we've released in our latest and greatest threat landscape report. You've been doing these threat landscape report for years and years and years. There's really been some interesting shifts, haven't there? Especially if we look even just 1 year ago.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
There's always new things to talk about, and more often than not, we have our minds blown every 6 months.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about some of those things, right? First of all, I'm going to start with the big R word because it always comes up, that household name, ransomware. It's interesting because to me, this is actually if you look at trends, something that's not new, but it's changed, right? Because we're actually seeing a roller coaster ride we called out in the report, but there's actually been overall, we hit this sort of plateau, right? Probably a year ago, where if you look at some previous reports, it was like exponential growth in volume of ransomware, and that's just not the case anymore. But really, that doesn't mean the risk is any lower, right?
No, not at all. Especially if you take into consideration not only what's happening in ransomware, but what's happening between the cyber criminal enterprises and the nation state threat actors, right? They're more in sync and working in symbiotic ways, which means the attacks, even when looking at cybercrime attacks, they are more targeted and they take a lot of time doing reconnaissance, building cyber weapons to target that specific organization which they have in mind. So, yeah, although the volume has decreased and plateaued in some ways, it doesn't mean that the risk is any lower, right? It's just there's not that many spray and pray attacks anymore. They're just sniping companies left and right.
Absolutely, that's what's happening, and those organizations are the bigger targets. Specifically operational technology. We've called that out before in manufacturing, but certainly healthcare, enterprise, and exactly like you said, they're behaving more like nation state APT groups. On that subject as well, on APT groups, we have a feature in the report that shows activity that we've seen from these groups, and keep in mind, these groups, they're in usually long development cycles, right? Like one group has one focus, one target, or maybe a handful at the most, over 2 years. Like we're talking years, not months, right? But what's interesting in the report, maybe you can expound on this, Doug. There's 41 out of 100. So not 100. There's a finite number of these so far. 138 known groups. We have 41, so 30%. To me, that's a big number, right?
It is. It is, especially when you think that the cycle of attack of an APT, it's not as comparable to cybercrime. Cybercrime is always shooting. They don't care about who they breach. They're all about the money, right? But APT actors are actually very methodical, right? They have a lot of resources and they have patience by their side, right? Because they have one goal in mind, which is mainly espionage, exfiltrating of state secrets, and sometimes, as we've seen, escalating with geopolitical tensions worldwide, wiping systems and destroying critical infrastructure. So seeing a third of that whole bunch of APT groups active at one time just reassure us that what's happening in the physical domain gets spilled into the cyber domain. So the wars that are happening, the cyber political tensions worldwide, we can see them in the cyber domain as well, which it's kind of like the same thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very interesting, and we've talked about that before with wipers, right? Where we see that
Yeah.
spillover effect in cybercrime, and it goes back to it's really both ways, right? We talked about cybercrime acting more like APT groups, being more sophisticated. In this stat that we just talked about, we see APT groups being more active, and I think there's a correlation there, right? Because as APT groups are effectively sponsoring and working with cybercrime groups, they're not sleeping for 2 years like they did before, right? They're being much more active with them. So it's again to if you're just looking at the numbers, 30% doesn't seem like a lot, but if you put that context, it's actually a big deal, right?
It is.
So I think it's important to call out. Some other views that we continue to build on are related to threat-informed defense. I know this is something we talked about. We're a research partner with MITRE Ingenuity, with the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. Doug, I know you're leading a lot of those great projects there. As a result, some of these views we get are related to, hey, how can I manage my priority to response for informed defense? A simple exercise that we've done in the report is the red zone. For the last 2 reports now, so the last year that we look at, it's in essence a good news story, right? Because that's kind of sweet spot. If we take a look at this, the sweet spot is hovering around 8 to 9% of, hey, you don't have to worry about all the 200,000 plus CVEs. In reality, it's around 8 to 9%. So what's your observations with that?
Yeah, so I was talking to a lot of CISOs when doing customer engagements and on cybersecurity conferences worldwide, when we discovered that a lot of them had kind of like a blunt approach to vulnerability patching, meaning that they would get their most critical systems, they would look on those critical systems for critical vulnerabilities, and they would patch them first. And then they would go to the critical and then high priority. Sometimes they get to medium, but the low priority ones they will never get to because there's so many new vulnerabilities coming out. So the idea to create the red zone was a response to that. So we could say, hey, cyber defenders worldwide, let's take a look at how we can correlate 2 data sets, which we do have in Fortinet, because we do have that specific data set from FortiClient vulnerabilities and FortiGate IPS detections, and let's correlate them to see which ones are actually open and under attack. But this is a very interesting statistic at a global scale, but it is just basically an insightful information for CISOs to take a look at their own environments, because more often than not, and I expect them to have control of the number of vulnerabilities they have open on their systems inside their networks, and they have IPS sitting at the border. So, hey, take a look at this, look how cool it is, and look specific the prioritization power you gain from just correlating these 2 data sets, which I'm pretty sure most of the CISOs and cyber defenders have access to. So it's just, mind tickle for CISOs worldwide, so that they can do the same at their own environments and help them prioritizing their vulnerability schedule, because it is something that it needs to be done effectively, because just patching critical vulnerabilities, it's not a smart approach, right? And it can backfire pretty quickly.
Yeah, and again, like this is always, I completely agree. Also, when I talk to CISOs, it's always don't tell me about all the bad news. Like, how do I'm overwhelmed here, right? Like, how do I actually prioritize response? And that's on all fronts. So, I mean, we're not going to talk about that today because that's a whole nother conversation on machine learning, AI, AI-driven security operations and active defense. But just simple from that patch management conversation that we've had for decades, this is a great tool for it. And it really shows how, again, by the numbers, and we call this out in the report, there's that from a blue team posture, right? There's the open attack surface. So that's how many, on average, per organization's CVEs that are open worldwide. It's about 16,000, right? It's not 200,000. And then again, when you look at the red team, so actually exploiting those vulnerabilities, it's much lower, about 50.
Yes.
So you go from 200K plus to 16,000 to one, less than 2,000. It's a much more manageable conversation. Yeah. So yeah, I love this view, and I think it's very powerful. So that's something we'll continue to report on this and more innovative updates. Another great one. Speaking of being ready for attacks and threat-informed defense, is our outbreaks. So we've talked about our outbreaks before. We have this in FortiAnalyzer as an outbreak detection service. You can find them on FortiGuard.com. They're also highlighted on our Fortinet.com page. Well, the outbreak talks about the latest attack and goes through a methodical protect, detect, respond, and so forth from a security fabric. We've now hooked in EPSS to these outbreaks. So that's something that we've actually helped develop at Fortinet, right? The exploit prediction scoring system.
Yeah, exactly. So again, trying to give the community something that they can rely on to make sure that they are taking the most efficient approach to understanding what they should prioritize and what they should focus on. So this is just a view that highlights the moving scores for the MOVEit vulnerability, right? So you can see that when specific milestones are hit, like, the vulnerability is basically described in MITRE, there's a proof of concept exploit. The proof of concept exploit got integrated into an automated exploitation tool. And as we see exploitation for that vulnerability on the wild, the score gets higher, right? So it's just a very good representation of how the EPSS score moves as new things, new information, and new possibilities come for the attackers once they have at their disposal basically the cyber weapons to explore that vulnerability, right? It's a very good visual representation to give cyber defenders an idea of how long do they have after a specific proof of concept exploit is released until they actually see massive exploitation on the wild, right? So it's very powerful as well. I like that.
Yeah. So again, to me, this is another threat-informed defense mechanism.
Yes.
It's another way of prioritizing, again, because when we look at CVSS, it's static. It's a lunch. At this point in time, it's at CVSS 9 because it's remote code execution and it's a 0-day. But that changes over time, and that's the cool thing about EPSS. And exactly like you said, we're actually using that, like our own prediction scoring, to issue these outbreaks ahead of time before they become actually a big issue, and that's a huge deal, right? And and that's the cool thing about the MOVEit one that we highlighted here is it's quite accurate. Like we gave it a high EPSS score, 2 days before on June 3rd, 2 days before we released the outbreak on the 5th, and sure enough, we saw high exploitation in the wild afterwards. So that's a great example. I think it's very powerful because not only does it allow you to be aware of what's coming down the curve and what's likely to be a problem in 2 or 3 days, but it also allows you to prioritize response to those as well too. The great thing about the outbreaks is it's not just, hey, here's a problem. I mean, the actual outbreak itself walks through that whole posture defense, right? So that's a great thing. So we've also now updated the outbreaks with the EPSS score. So if you go to FortiGuard.com, you can find that EPSS score on the outbreak itself, which again is a very powerful thing. So.
The report is all about empowering defenders, right? It's just more than just data. Hey, this is what's happening, but a way forward, right? A way to think about what you can do with possibly the data you already have, and with open source tools, and obviously using Fortinet technology.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing we'll talk about quickly is the attack sightings. So if you look at the MITRE attack framework, it's very big.
It's growing as well.
It continues to. There's more techniques that attackers are getting. In our observation, quite simply, when we looked at the sightings of all the TTPs, again, 2/3 of those we saw active, about 67% of all the techniques they're actually using. So that means that they're not a one-trick pony, essentially, right?
No. And I mean, to have 2/3 of 500 plus techniques active, that means that your security operations needs to be actively looking for ways to get those techniques, give them to your red team, make sure they can build evasions on top of those techniques, and testing your blue team on those evasions of those techniques. Because more likely than not, the cyber attackers out there are doing just that. So you have right now the possibility and the data to do what's possibly coming in a month or two. So
yeah.
it's up to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a whole nother conversation in terms of purple teaming. We can absolutely talk about in the future. I think it's a great subject, but these are the tools. This is the data in the threat landscape report. So we'll continue to build on this. Again, these are new views, right? That really help paint a picture of what's coming. And actually, most of it is good news in a sense that because of these predictive modeling, because of the tools now available for prioritization, because of things like machine learning, AI powered SecOps in the fabric, we can actually get ahead here, right? We don't have to
finally
be on the defense and waiting all the time. So that's a great thing.
Yes.
All right. Well, hey, Doug, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Always great talking to you. For the viewers out there, you can find all the latest from FortiGuard Labs on Fortinet.com and just click on the FortiGuard Labs Threat Intelligence. Thanks again for watching. I'm Derek Manky, signing off with FortiGuard Live.